Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Less than 50 years after the Shah fled Iran, it appears unlikely, although not impossible, that the successor regime will not be around to celebrate its Jubilee. It therefore seems prudent to consider the probable day-after scenarios in order that such considerations may also serve as valuable input to prior planning for the Ayatollah regime's demise and the following aftermath. Lessons learned from Afghanistan and Iraq point to the wisdom of early discounting of illusions in favor of realistic expectations, leading to wise preparations. Joining us to analyze these matters include Mr. Oded Eilam, formerly the director of the Mossad Counterterrorism Division. It's good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you for having me.
And also joining us is Professor Russell Berman, who formerly served as a senior advisor at the U.S. State Department's policy planning staff, currently the director of the Middle East project at Hoover Institution. It's good to have you with us, sir.
Good to be back, Jonathan.
It's always a pleasure having both of you. And last but not least, TV7's editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, a day after is always the question that everybody asks themselves. We all know how we enter into scenarios. We never know how we exit them. But nonetheless, let's try and analyze this very important point.
There are notionally two avenues for discussion. One, Iran keeps a central government, and the question is who is going to be the supreme leader or a council of government. Of course, sometimes there are troikas, there is a Naguib, and then a Nasser emerges. But just to try and find out who could be the forces after Khamenei. The other possibility is fragmentation, that there will not be a Persia, but an Azeri part in the north, some other district around the petrol centers or the ports on the Persian Gulf, Arabian Gulf. And if the American administration, the US intelligence community, the armed forces have been planning these two scenarios, at least since last June, maybe they do have up their sleeves various cards according to the two scenarios.
Indeed. Well, Professor Berman, I'd like to start with you, since obviously any action undertaken by the United States, be it a diplomatic resolution of sorts or a kinetic strike, will be an action, or rather a tool to achieve a certain goal. Let's define the goal for a moment. What is the goal for the United States, which is the one that ultimately would decide what happens in Iran in the day after?
I'm not sure that the American decision about which goal to pursue will be the exclusive determiner on what transpires in Iran. There are other variables as well. What happens in the streets, the loss of legitimacy of the regime, inter-regime competition. Having said that, I'd underscore that in the discussion, there's a range of goals that a United States administration might pursue. There's obviously a lot of sympathy for the democratic aspirations of the Iranian people who've been protesting this regime for a long time, and now even more emphatically than in the past. That's where the public's heart is. That's where some politicians' heart is. And it's, of course, where President Trump was when he encouraged the Iranians to protest the government, to seize government buildings. In the meantime, however, there's another goal that has been a longstanding desideratum of American foreign policy, and that is the nuclear file, to prevent nuclear proliferation. There is a world in which the United States might be satisfied with a defanged Iraqi regime, a genuine renunciation of the pursuit of nuclear. But the domestic mode of governance is up to them. This administration is quite happy with the Saudi Arabia that is generally friendly to the United States, but is surely not a democratic regime. You could imagine an MBS type taking over in Saudi. So to bring that too long of an answer to a conclusion, one answer is democracy. The other answer is renunciation of nuclear.
Indeed. Well, the U.S. will undoubtedly be tentative and factor in any type of variable you referred to at the start in its broader calculus when approaching the question of what type of tools to employ in what type of scenario in order to achieve the various goals at hand. But nonetheless, as Professor Berman has mentioned, the spirit on the ground, so to speak, of the Iranian people who have now suffered immeasurable brutality by this Ayatollah regime, they're not going to necessarily stand idly by and allow an outcome to form which they do not want to achieve. It will obviously establish additional complexities. But Mr. Eilam, when you're looking at the discourse on the ground right now, taking into consideration, of course, the internet blackout that was, the tens of thousands of murders that the Ayatollah regime has perpetrated over the course of the last several weeks, is that something that can be translated into a tenable regime change that would not splinter this construct of multiple peoples, from the Azeris to the Kurds to the Arabs to the Persians and so on and so forth? Something that obviously is raising a lot of concern in various regional capitals these days.
The answer is unfortunately not, and it's due to the fact that it was the regime had portrayed such a brutal, unprecedented force in curbing down any sort of insurgents and protests, that in fact it's terrified the whole nation. And I don't see and I don't think that right now there is a capability of anyone to resume that sort of protest that we have seen before, simply because the fact they absolutely know what is going to be the outcome of such an event. The only way that people will go and again into the street is when they feel the regime is on the verge of collapse. And this is not absolutely the situation now. The regime was terrified in the first few days, but very, very quickly regained its conscience and used such a brutal force. And I think it's maybe some of the consequences and the outcome of the Arab Spring, wherever brutal force was in fact inflicted and was used, the regime had managed to stay. So I don't think right now this is the issue. I don't think the solution to this very complicated issue, this regime, will come from the streets, but rather from a different area. And as far as I see it, the only way to topple this regime is to copy-paste the Ajax operation in 1953, where they toppled the president and the Shah was nominated, and it was an internal coup combined with external forces of the British and the Americans. And I don't think the American administration, this administration, even think of democracy. This is not on their terms. It's not an engine that drives Trump's administration. I think they are more into the practical level. And the only practical level that I see is a combination of external force, economical, and also some sort of affiliation with internal forces, because we don't see any sort of a leadership coming out of the protests.
Thank you, Mr. Eilam. Professor Berman, do you see eye to eye with Mr. Eilam on this?
Yeah, very, very much so. This administration wants a solution, and it's not going to, certainly not going to commit boots on the ground to topple the regime. I think we could look at what's been playing out in Venezuela as a model of what might take place in Iran, eliminating the hostility of the regime, but preserving stability, particularly with an eye to controlling the oil markets. This is not an administration that is committed to spreading democracy. But to be fair, neither was the previous administration. It's been a long time since any American administration had the illusion that it could spread democracy successfully around the world. It's a different world system than was in the past. The only way the regime will change will be if there's internal competition. That is, if elements in the IRGC, there must be some smart people there, understand that this leadership is bringing the country down, then there'll be some kind of internal coup, and that'll be up to them to decide whether they present themselves as Democrats or as Islamists. But one way or another, this is not going to be decided in Washington. It's going to be decided in some conversations in Tehran.
Indeed. Well, Mr. Oren, when we're talking about the conversation in Tehran versus the conversation in Washington, ultimately it comes down to there needs to be some type of foreign intervention in order to trigger the motions within Tehran to have that discourse. And President Trump and the United States military have allotted quite the force at this point in time, at least. And it's not stopping. It seems like more and more assets are entering the theater, both defensive, again, surface-to-air capabilities, obviously the surface-to-surface capabilities and other type of capabilities that need to be taken out in such an operation. But it's not a force, it's far beyond a force, if I may put it this way, that is required in order to establish a blockade or a surgical type of operation. This is a blowout type of force. Is that something that is going to convince the other side? And if utilized, to what degree or what type of decapitation would be required in order to bring the same shock and awe that we saw in Tehran's most potent proxy, Hezbollah, for instance?
If you compare the two American wars against Iraq, 91 and 2003, Bush the first and the second, the most delicate part of the operation is what the U.S. Army, U.S. military calls Phase 4. Okay, you won. The so-called million-man army has been obliterated, to use Trump's word. What now? So destruction is easy. Construction, reconstruction, you don't know how to go about it. Now, Oded mentioned the operation against Mossad, the Ajax plan. At that time, there were oil companies in Iran. The British were well established. The Americans helped, and the Iranian military helped the Pahlavi dynasty. Now, you don't have anyone, as far as we know, in the two military forces, the Artesh, the military itself, and the IRGC, that can be put up as an alternative. My guess, it's only a guess, is that this will happen once Khamenei passes away and there is a succession battle. Perhaps his son, other clergy against various forces. Then it could splinter.
Indeed. With that being said, Mr. Eilam, when we're talked about Hassan Nasrallah, for instance, the former Secretary General of Hezbollah, time and again it was said, his predecessor was less terrible than Nasrallah, and that's why maybe the next one would be even worse, and so on and so forth. But what we learned from the last 2 years is that if you decapitate enough of the command and control, I mean, it shakes an organization from within and brings the shivers to a point of of freezing them, right? And that is something that we're seeing. Obviously, they will have a room to rehabilitate unless more action is undertaken, but the United States has the capacity to do that. And the military, despite having more commanders and more officers than Hezbollah does, its construction is relatively similar. Is this also a viable option to be examined in this context?
I don't think so. Iran is completely different from a terror organization on the capacity, on the resources, and on we are talking about 90 million people, and we are talking about 156,000 Republican guards, and the army is around 560,000 soldiers. So it is not the same as a small organization with a very limited resources and capacity of leadership. This is a completely different story. So I don't think this is the solution. The solution is exactly what we discussed before, is to trying to provoke an internal coup within. It can come from the Republican guards, it can come from the army, it can come from somewhere else. Okay, and I want to add to what Amir had said very correctly. First of all, we have to see the diminishing one way or another of this 86-year-old man, Khamenei, the Valaya Itfaki, because he is a symbol of this regime. And I don't think anything it can happen as long he is intact, as long as he's in power. And his power is diminishing because, first of all, he's 86 and very, very sick. And also, there are a lot of successors are waiting down the line. So in that case, I think the solution will be of external power that will be inflicted on the regime, together with the combination of some sort of channels that I'm absolutely sure the CIA is conducting to prominent figures in Iran.
Professor Berman, taking all what we just heard into the equation, what is the next step?
The next step is, as we just heard, a matter of engineering a regime change from within. This is not going to be American troops marching into Iran. It's not going to be Israeli troops marching into Iran forcing this. This is going to be have the appearance of an internal regime change. And as I said before, a question is, what's the political substance of that change going to be? Is it going to be another cleric who's still committed to the same religious ideology? Is it going to be a secular army officer who wants to save his country and wraps himself in a nationalist banner? Is it going to be someone who's committed to significant reforms? The kind of regime we've seen in Iran, well, really since 1979, and certainly under Khamenei, that is coming to an end. What the personnel will be, that's the question. And I am certain that American and other intelligence services are operating within the cohort of possible candidates that are currently in Tehran now. So the next step is, I suppose, for the West, aka the United States, to put even further squeeze on Iran, whether that's even tighten sanctions or some kind of military attack. A military attack, for example, that would provoke the army leadership to say, this has gone too far. We have to stop now. We want to let us save Iran from the devastation that Khamenei is inviting, and let's come to a modicum of agreement with the great Satan.
May I support Professor Berman's thesis earlier about the defanged Iran? Why does the regime want to have its nuclear project? Because up to now, it has seen it as an asset for regime survival. But if it must choose between the nukes and its own survival, it will go do away with the nukes one way or the other, because the ultimate prize for the regime is its own survival.
Yes, but if I may challenge that for a moment, the essence of the Ayatollah regime is its revolutionary nature within the confines of 12 Shia Islam. For it to possess a weapon of mass destruction as an umbrella to a strategy of exporting the revolution, so to speak, and spreading its tentacles not only in the region but around the world, that would become a viable solution to it rather than just preventing the regime from falling, which it is managing to do also without a nuclear weapon at this point in time, by just embedding itself so heftily into the infrastructure of the civilian infrastructure of the state that without the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, which happens to be the institution that preserves the state, nothing can really shatter it. So
that's true, but once an asset becomes a burden, you get rid of it.
Well, naturally, there are various risk calculations within the broader spectrum, but Mr. Eilam, on that point, it's very similar to what we see, for instance, in Egypt, where when Hosni Mubarak was ousted and we saw Mohammad Morsi take over, the Muslim Brotherhood, which was the core enemy of the military in Egypt, had to rely on the Egyptian military nonetheless because it controlled the institutions, it controlled the money, it controlled the infrastructure, and therefore that relationship was initially forged with the intention, undoubtedly, to slowly take over like a disease over that country. The same is currently the situation in Iran, where we see the RGC being very much that infrastructure of all state institutions, including financial, energy, and other aspects that require for a state to function. We're talking here about between 100 to 90 million people, which is not a small number of people. And this is something that is taken into account. Obviously, the sanctions that are currently being slapped on the Islamic Revolutionary Guards over and over and over again, not just by the United States, but by the European Union, now that it also designated this organization, and others, is going to weaken it further. But to what degree is this going to, is it required to weaken it in order to make a drastic shift, not just a gradual shift over time?
First of all, I want to mention one thing that we all have to know. There is nothing worse than this regime. I mean, whatever the outcome will be, we had reached bottom low regarding the ideology, the capability, the willingness, and of course, the jihadic philosophy. Now, whatever comes out, and we don't know yet, will not be preoccupied with exporting the revolution, but importing assurances for the well-being and for themselves, first of all. So I'm not worried who is going to replace the current regime. Of course, there will be a situation for, we don't know for how long, some sort of a vacuum, and we don't know who's going to fulfill this vacuum. But and the bottom line, whoever comes will be better.
Professor Berman, we have roughly 2.5 minutes for this, but let's go into strategic power competition for a moment, where Iran plays a very significant role for both Russia and China. Within this context, obviously, the United States, which has published its strategy for this administration to include also promoting the Monroe Doctrine on the one hand, but also prioritizing the Indo-Pacific, decoupling Russia from China would require also turning off the so-called stream of munitions from a variety of countries, including the Islamic Republic of Iran. Is this in the calculus of the United States when decision-making is being weighed with regard to whether or not to launch an attack against the Islamic Republic at this point in time?
I'm sure it is. I still continue to believe that the key goal of this administration, of any American administration right now, is the nuclear file. But that's going to include some kind of regime change about the nature of which we've been discussing. How this fits into great power competition at this dangerous moment is a complex question. It's remarkable that China and Russia have not come more vocally to the defense of the regime, although the scope of the killing that the regime has carried out is something that neither Moscow nor Beijing wants to be associated with. I don't think they're nice guys there, but they just don't want to deal with that propaganda loss. I think we're entering into a very, very dangerous moment in terms of great power competition, and Iran is just one small story within this. The prospect of some kind of great power kinetic conflict, I think, is higher now than it's been in a long time.
I will point out that there was supposed to be a scheduled maneuver exercise of the Iranian Navy with the Russian and Chinese navies. This has been postponed to an unknown date, which does speak volumes. Mr. Owen, closing sentence?
There is a low probability of regime change and a much higher probability of a changed regime because of the pressure being put on it.
Indeed. Well, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Mr. Eilam and Professor Berman for all of your insights. I'd like also to thank Mr. Amir Oren and to thank you at home. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
I'm Eran, former Deputy National Security Advisor here in Israel, a diplomat, a strategist by training. I'm very happy to be at TV7 and offer my interpretation along my esteemed colleagues. The strong point of TV7 is to be a reliable source of authoritative insight in an era of shallow news environment that is very difficult for viewers to trust.
Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.